Hi everyone, this is Peter Schiff again. It's Saturday, August 22nd, 2009. Well, I happened to be on the internet today and I saw a video blog posted by, I guess, one of my critics who was trying to discredit my forecasting ability. And I thought I would mention some of the points raised by this individual because I know that many of you who are fans of mine might encounter these types of arguments from other people, and I thought I'd give you some talking points to know how to combat them. First of all, the individual acknowledged that I was correct in forecasting the bursting of the housing bubble, although he downplayed the significance of that by stating that I was simply one of many, many people who made the same call. But then he goes on to state all my other forecasts where he alleges that I was completely wrong. For example, he says that I said interest rates would rise sharply when they fell. He says I claimed the dollar would collapse, but the dollar strengthened. He says that I claimed that one day the price of the Dow would equal 1 ounce of gold, and that hasn't happened. And of course, these forecasts that haven't happened were used to discredit, what I've said. Now, of course, I've never made any time commitments on those forecasts. I simply pointed out things that would happen ultimately. And in fact, anybody who's familiar with my writings knows that one of the reasons that I'm so confident that the dollar is going to fall so sharply and that interest rates are going to rise is because I was fearful of the policies that the government would pursue to try to reflate the real estate bubble, to try to artificially combat the recession. And I made those forecasts in advance of the real estate bubble bursting. And of course, that is exactly what the government is doing. The government is doing precisely what I feared they would do. And ultimately, my forecast of a much lower dollar, of rising long-term interest rates, and of a very weak Dow in terms of the price of gold are probably going to come true. The fact that they haven't come true yet doesn't discredit their accuracy, especially since I made no claims as to precisely when these events would occur. If you recall, I was talking about the housing bubble back in 2003, 2004, 2005, long before it burst. Many people were making the argument in 2007 that, well, Schiff has been talking about this housing bubble for so long, he's been wrong, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So simply criticizing somebody for warning about something far enough in advance where people can actually do something about it makes no sense. Now, of course, this individual goes on to claim that the fact that the stock market is so strong, well, that proves that the economy is getting much better, and so I'm wrong there as well. Well, I mean, the stock market was very strong between 2003 and 2007. That's when the seeds of all these economic problems were being sown. Just because the stock market is going up doesn't mean that everything is great, that this is the all clear. In fact, in many cases, the stock market rallies precisely before we get an economic decline, which is what just happened. But what particularly bothers me by critics like this is when they attack my patriotism. They try to say that all I do is badmouth America, and America is such a great country, we have a better standard of living than people in other parts of the world. Now, first of all, we clearly do have a better standard of living than most people. But I would say that on a relative basis, we had a much bigger lead 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when we had a lot less government. And in fact, I think the typical family, before we had this big increase in government, when you didn't need two breadwinners to support a family, I think even in absolute terms, our grandparents or our parents might have lived better than we do, absent technology. But the key is the sustainability of that standard of living. Our standard of living is based on debt. We've borrowed this money. We really can't afford it. That's the problem. And the problem is when the world stops subsidizing our phony standard of living, it comes to an end. Just being a mindless cheerleader doesn't make you a patriotic. You want to point this out. A good example would be, let's say there's an island and the people fish and then they eat their fish and that's how they survive. Let's say all of a sudden somebody puts a bunch of free fish on the beach. Now they don't have to fish, so they eat all the free fish. And let's say this goes on day after day. They're living pretty good. They're eating and they're not fishing. Well, let's say over time, all their fishing equipment deteriorates, because it's not being used. Let's say over the generations, nobody on the island even remembers how to fish. But they have a great standard of living because they get to eat for nothing. Well, my point is that we're not going to get free fish forever. What happens when the free fish stop coming? we all starve? What I want is to point this out. I want the nation to understand that the free fish aren't going to keep coming, that we need to rebuild the nets and the poles, that we need to make the traps, that we need to teach our children how to fish, because we can't live on free fish forever. Anyway, that's it for this blog. The reason I don't want to point out the name of this particular individual is I just don't want to give him a bunch of free publicity or hits on his websites because he takes a few pot shots at me. And of course, if anybody can figure out who he is, I would appreciate you not making any comments on this site as to tip other people off. And certainly, now this is serious, whatever you do not send this individual an email. Do not make a post on his site. And if you do, don't use any curse words or foul language. Don't threaten him. Don't threaten his children. He is very, very sensitive about this stuff. And so I don't want to cause him any mental pain. I don't want to worry him at all because he is very sensitive. So please respect this individual and don't make fun of him or don't call him any names. In fact, the fact that he is trying to point out the mistakes that I've made. Of course, nobody's perfect, right? I didn't get everything right. I did not think that we would have such a big counter-trend rally in the dollar in 2008, or that we would have this big sucker rally in the bonds. But of course, nobody knows more than anybody else, or this person should know more than anybody, how easy it is to make a mistake or to get something wrong, because he's pretty much gotten everything wrong. Anyway, that's it for today. I've gone way over my 5 minutes. Hopefully people still watch this video.